Thank you all for coming this afternoon. We're looking forward to giving you an update.
And we're going to start out by introducing ourselves. And knowing that we are the first presentation after lunch, we are going to try to be as exciting and compelling as we can so that you'll all stay awake. But this is just 4 of us from our delegation that are representing our delegation today, and I see a couple other of our reserves in the congregation right now. But we'll introduce ourselves, and then we each have a section that we're going to talk about. And after each section, we're going to have time for questions. So if you have questions, just keep them, and we'll make sure we get to all of them if we can. I am Jenny Arneson, and I serve as the lead pastor at the Sun Prairie United Methodist Church, and also serve as one of the co-chairs of our delegation and one of our clergy representatives for the delegates. And we'll just go around and introduce.
My name is Don Kramer. I'm a lay member of Milwaukee Central. I am an alternate for the General Conference delegates.
I am Lisa King. I am laity member at Fall River United Methodist Church and one of the voting delegates at General Conference.
All right, and this is my sister because I'm another Lisa. I am Lisa Jones. I am a lay member from Brown Deer United Methodist Church, and I am a voting General Conference delegate.
And we're going to use the lectern and use this handheld mic for our questions. I'm going to give let's see, yeah, we're looking here. Okay. I'm going to give us a brief overview of General Conference and what is ahead of us in April and May. And for some of you, this will be review, and for others, it might be new information. But our General Conference is the United Methodist Church is the only decision-making body of our denomination and meets every 4 years. And so every 4 years when the General Conference meets, it makes revisions to church law, which is our book of discipline. And it also adopts resolutions on current issues, moral issues, social issues, economic issues that are within our social principles. So that's some of the bulk of what happens at General Conference is revisions to the Book of Discipline as our church law and also resolutions to our social principles. And also General Conference approves plans and budgets for all of our agencies and all of the programs within the worldwide denomination as well. And General Conference was to meet in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Wouldn't that have been nice to be so close? In 2020, but then because of the little thing called the pandemic, we were canceled twice because of challenges with the pandemic and getting people from around the world to Minneapolis. So now we will be meeting April 23rd to May 3rd in Charlotte, North Carolina. And this is, even though it's 2024, this is considered the postponed 2020 General Conference. So that's important language when you're hearing about General Conference. This is really the postponed 2020 General Conference. And just to give us a little bit of breakdown from around the world, and we have a slide that will go with this. That's up there. But General Conference is made up of 862 delegates. So the 4 of us are part of the 862, and half our clergy and half our laity at General Conference, and from around the world, 55.9% of the delegates come from the United States, 32% come from the continent of Africa, 6% come from the Philippines, and 4.6% from Europe, and then the remainder come from different concordant churches that have close ties to the United Methodist Church. And then in addition to those 862 delegates, there's estimated that there will be between 5,500 and 7,500 people from around the world coming to be either observers or make presentations at General Conference over those 10 days. So there'll be a lot of people in Charlotte, North Carolina. And also, when you're bringing the world together, in a worldwide meeting, you need to have interpreters and translators. And so that's a big part of our multinational, multicultural General Conference. And there are 4 official languages of the General Conference, one being English, French, Swahili, and Portuguese. Those are the 4 official languages, but then there are also translation for 10 other languages around the world. So if you happen to watch online General Conference and you see some people sitting with their headphones on, they're getting translation, which is just ominous to me of how that all happens. And then in addition to that, one of the translations is also American Sign Language, so we have that for folks who need that. The theme this year for General Conference comes based on Psalm 46 and verse 10, which says, "And know that I am God." So that will be our theme throughout General Conference, and know that I am God. United Methodist Church, just to give us a brief history, you might know that it came into being in April of 1968. How many were actually, when the merger happened in 1968, were you part of the church? Oh, yay! So we do have some that have been around a while. And then you will know that the Methodist Church merged with the Evangelical United Brethren Church, the EUBs. Any EUB? Oh, yay! Always good to have some EUBs raise their hand. So Evangelical United Brethren Church and the Methodist Church joined together, forming the United Methodist Church. And that's when our logo of the cross and flame came into being. And if you look closely at that cross and flame, you know that it's the cross of Christ. And then it's two flames coming up into one flame, representing the two denominations coming together. And it wasn't just that the folks that were delegates at General Conference that year just landed at General Conference and decided to merge two denominations. It really was about 10 years in the making to bring that merger together. And then it happened in 1968. Other things that I want to give us. So of our Wisconsin delegation, we were elected in 2019 at our Wisconsin Annual Conference. And for us in Wisconsin, we have 6 voting members, 3 clergy and 3 laity. And then we have our reserve delegates as well. So we're one of when you consider around the world, we're one of the smaller delegations with just 6 voting members. And currently there are 53 annual conferences within the United States, and there are 80 annual conferences in Africa, Europe, and the Philippines. So those will be all represented at General Conference as well. And then the first week of General Conference is spent mainly in legislative sessions, so we're a lot like the Congress. We're in legislation committees in the first week, and there are 14 legislative committees that consider all the petitions that will come before General Conference. And so petitions are broken up into the 14 different legislative sessions. And then coming to General Conference this year, there are 1,100 petitions. And every petition does need to be voted on at General Conference. So even if it might seem like a silly petition, it has to be voted on at General Conference. So there's 1,100 petitions, and that includes 352 new petitions that have come in since the 2020 postponement of General Conference. So we have to consider all the petitions that were for the 2020 General Conference, and then there was a time frame where you could submit new petitions. And there's 352 of those. And then the second week will be spent in plenary session, where all the delegates will come together and vote on the petitions that have come out of the legislative sessions. And the bishops at General Conference, our bishops at General Conference, have no vote at General Conference. They have no voice at General Conference, but they preside over the plenary sessions at General Conference. So that's our role of bishops at General Conference, is to preside over the sessions, but they do not have voice or vote. This really is left to the delegates of General Conference. So I'll stop there for right now, and just in the midst of all this, thank you for your prayers as we get moving toward General Conference as things get closer. But are there any general questions about that? And Don, you have the microphone. You might want to run around if there are any questions. Oh, okay.
You're on the delegation.
But she has a question.
We haven't gotten around to this, and I'm still learning, and I just was looking at the daily Christian advocate thing, which can anybody look at that so we could, and people here could...
Actually, Lisa King will be having that presentation.
Good, okay.
In just one minute.
So I submitted, and it was received, and it's printed, a petition this year that's a new one, and I didn't realize that all of them got a vote. I thought that the committees could decide not to vote on one, but when you said some people will be presenting, so when they present a petition, does anybody speak about it? Is there any discussion? Or
no, when the presentations, I wasn't meaning on the petitions.
Got it.
There's other presentations, like at our annual conference. In between things, there's a presentation from the camping, or a presentation from United Women in Faith. So those kind of presentations.
Got it. Mm-hmm. And is there any opportunity to give explanation to the committees that are reviewing before the votes?
No.
Okay. Because you're limited to like 100 words, and it's very like brief.
Thank you.
Thank you. When you mentioned about the 1,100 petitions and then you go into the legislative different committees, so do those committees then vote on their section?
Yes.
And then those that they choose to or pass, then they are taken to
Correct.
the main body?
Correct.
Okay.
So,
Thank you for
so the
that
petitions may
clarification.
get a vote. They may get a vote in the legislative session, not to be moved on to plenary.
Okay, so not every one of them gets moved on.
Correct, but everyone
they
is
could, but
yes, but
it's
everyone is
probably
acted on,
unlikely.
and then some are put on a consent agenda as well. So they're not don't need to be voted on individually.
Thank you.
They're recording it, so they want to-
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, you mentioned this is 2020 postponed at General Conference. Is there going to be a 2024?
Not really. So so this will be the postponed 2020 in 2024, and then most likely there will be a specially called General Conference in 2026 to tidy up things that were acted on in 2024 here. Well, why don't we move on? Don is going to give us some information about Wisconsin delegation, how that fits into our denomination.
Thank you. So actually, if we can go back to that last slide, please. So I want to join the delegation because I really like the idea of the United Methodist being like this global denomination. And this is a depiction of where we are heavily represented in the world. You can see United Methodist is sort of centralized in the United States as of right now. We have 5 jurisdictions: Western, North Central, South Central, Northeastern, and Southeastern. 5 jurisdictions in the United States. And then groups of annual conferences around the globe are grouped in central conferences, is what they're called. The central conferences are primarily in Africa, the Philippines, and Europe and Eurasia. And you can see that all up on the screen right now. So when we talk about jurisdictions, we're usually talking about groups of annual conferences in the U.S., and central conferences are groups of annual conferences outside of the U.S. If you would go to the next slide, please. And here's a breakdown of membership in those different groups. This data's tough because a lot of it hasn't been updated online in several years. So you can see all the central conferences data from 2018. Total church members of jurisdictional conferences, that hasn't been updated since 2021. As of the point of these 2 data points, 5.5 million members in the United States, 6.5 million members in the central conferences. Well, since then, we definitely have had disaffiliations in the United States. Our number is definitely going to be lower. The central conferences keep growing, so I'm sure that number needs to be updated and is probably larger. Just a view of how Little Wisconsin fits in with the global church. If you could go to the next slide, please. This is the information about our jurisdiction, the North Central jurisdiction. Jurisdictions have about 10, 11 annual conferences in it. In the North Central jurisdiction, you can see Wisconsin is in the second row down there. We're one of the smaller conferences in the jurisdiction, with about 50,000 members at the end of 2021. If you go to the next slide, please. This is a graph of, it's easier to see the graph than the actual numbers. You can see the Dakotas is the only conference that's smaller than Wisconsin as of 2021. The Dakotas and Minnesota conferences, they currently share a bishop, so that's a shared Episcopal area. And we will be talking a little bit about shared Episcopal regions in just a bit. But because of that, it's important to notice this graph and see where do we rank in sizes with other conferences. This next this next table is about Wisconsin. Wisconsin currently has 5 districts. Currently, we have 5 districts. We will be moving towards 4 districts in the near future. Our 4 districts are North Central, Northeast, Northwest, Southeast, and Southwest. You can see the breakdown here. It's pretty evenly percentage-wise, about 20% in each district as of right now, as of the end of 2022. I think this next slide showing the actual graph of it makes it a little bit easier to see. The orange and the yellow sections are the two southern districts, and the green shades are the northern districts. You can see how on the left side is the breakdown of how the churches are distributed, the 440 churches at the end of 2022. We are currently around 400 churches after disaffiliations, and you can see how the membership breaks down also at the end of 2022. So just an idea there of how our conference fits into the jurisdiction, fits into the general denomination. Any thoughts or questions on this information? Yeah.
I think I can probably speak.
But they're recording it.
We're recording it, so we're going to.
Thank you. This is end of 2022. What's it look like after disaffiliation? Do you have a sense?
We lost about 10% of churches, and we lost, I forget the actual membership right off bat. I can find it pretty easy. I'm the statistician for the conference, so yes, I'm collecting this data right now, and I have it somewhere. I just don't want to say a number off the top of my head when I really remember it.
Okay.
But about 10% of churches, so a good estimate is 10% of members too.
You can tell Don's our conference statistician, can't you? Makes numbers fun.
I try.
Any other questions with this section?
Oh,
okay.
Catherine?
I have a couple questions.
Oh boy.
So my first question is with the disaffiliation, and I know you haven't gathered all the data.
Right.
Is it feeling like any one of those particular areas disaffiliated more than others?
Definitely. Some conferences are hit harder, some jurisdictions are hit harder. So I know we've been thinking, oh, Wisconsin's getting smaller, we'll probably go down to 4 delegates in 2028, but really we don't know because if other conferences have gotten smaller because of disaffiliations, proportionally we might not have changed relative to other conferences. But yeah, there's definitely some conferences have been hit much harder than ours.
A lot of the disaffiliation was around the LGBTQT plus issue.
Yep.
And Africa oftentimes leans to be more conservative.
Correct.
Will there be decisions possibly that are based on continental or regional areas?
Actually, there's a lot of petitions about talking about regionalization, and we will be talking about that a little bit later. And yes, the politics behind regionalization, like how does that fit in with all the other things that are being presented at General Conference? That's definitely, it's coming, yeah. If not, I think, Jenny, you're back up here.
I'm just going to speak for a minute about our Wisconsin and Northern Illinois conferences coming together. You may have been part of online, or you may have heard of the special called our North Central Jurisdictional Conference met in a special session on January 23rd, and the vote was taken to share an Episcopal leader. So beginning on September 1st of 2024, we will share a bishop with Northern Illinois. And so it's clear, it needs to be clear that this is not a merger of our two conferences. It's simply sharing, but it's sharing an Episcopal leader. So we'll have one bishop that is over Northern Illinois and Wisconsin. And that we don't know who that bishop will be yet. Bishops are assigned at our North Central Jurisdictional Conference, which will meet in July, and that meeting will be in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and that will meet July 9th through the 12th, and then that's where bishops are assigned at that time. We do know that Bishop Jung will not be assigned back to Wisconsin because he has served 12 years among us, and we're thankful. So we know we will be getting a new bishop. in September 1st. And there's a lot of similarities between Northern Illinois and Wisconsin. Sometimes when we think of Northern Illinois, we think only of the Chicago area, but Northern Illinois is much bigger than just Chicago. And just to give you a couple numbers, both of our conferences have a lot of rural areas. Northern Illinois currently has 321 churches, and Wisconsin, after our disaffiliations, has right around 400 churches. And for Northern Illinois, through disaffiliation, they only disaffiliated 8 churches disaffiliated from Northern Illinois, and in Wisconsin, like Don said, about 10%, so it was 43 of our churches disaffiliated. And there's been a task force, Wisconsin task force and a Northern Illinois task force that's been meeting for a couple of years to be talking about this possibility of sharing an Episcopal leader, and I'm part of that task force. And now that we know that this will happen, now that group is coming together, both Wisconsin and Northern Illinois, to work out a lot of the logistics of how is a bishop going to move between the two conferences. So now it's those type of things that need to be worked out. But the decision to share an Episcopal leader has been made. And now Lisa King, who's our veteran on the delegation, she's been to more General Conferences than any of us, is going to give us a little bit of insight as to what goes on at General Conference. And she has books.
You make me feel old when you say I've been to more. But I have. My first General Conference was in 2008. And Jenny shared earlier that for this General Conference, 56% of the delegates are coming from the United States. When I first went, that number was 71%. So we have become much more international, and it's anticipated that the next General Conference will have the majority of people from outside the United States as the delegates. And Jenny also shared some about the translation kind of challenges that you have in having an international group meeting. And in 2008, the translation, the way it affected those of us who English is our native language the most was we were constantly telling each other over those 2 weeks, talk slower, because we needed to give times for those who were trying to translate time to do it. And so when you talk really fast, it's really hard for them to translate. So that was kind of our big thing that year. The next General Conference I went to, we had, because they did, if someone was speaking who didn't speak English, they would do a translation like through it so everybody got to hear the translation into English as well. At the next General Conference, we had headphones. So if the speaker was a non-English speaker, those of us who spoke English could put it on and could hear the translation. The non-English speakers always had their headphones on, as Jenny said, right from the beginning from the General Conferences that I went to. At the most recent General Conference, we all had our headphones on all the time because, I mean, except when we were talking to people next to each other, but for the actual plenary and everything, in order to be able to hear, they were translating into all of the languages all at the time, and unless the speaker happened to be speaking your language, you were hearing it as a translation. So that's been one of the challenges and one of the interesting things about General Conference and how it has shifted over the years. One of the other challenges, and the pandemic made it that much worse, but one of the challenges we've had for years relates to travel visas. A General Conference for the United Methodist Church has always been in the United States. I think were plans actually for the 2024 one, I believe, to be in outside of the United States, which is not happening. So that has created an issue for those who come from other countries in that they have to get visas in order to travel to the United States, which can be challenging from some of the countries that people come from. And so every year there's a part of it, the difficulty is we don't always know who is coming, particularly, say, from Africa, because we don't know if they will be able to get visas. So someone who might have been elected as a delegate to come might not be able to get a visa, and so they may have a reserve coming. So finding out who exactly the people are who are going to be serving becomes quite a challenge for those who are coming from other countries. Jenny also gave you some idea of the number of petitions that we will review at General Conference. I wanted to give you a visual of that. This is 4 years ago, when we thought we were meeting 4 years ago. We got these books in the mail with all of those petitions for us to be able to review. They sent us another 477 pages that came in the newest edition. That one they did not put out in paper, so that one we just have electronically. So we'll be saving lots of trees going forward just doing this electronically. So that's been another change in how the petitions have been handled. The petitions that come to General Conference, any United Methodist member or group can submit a petition to the General Conference, and each petition is normally assigned to one legislative committee. Jenny talked about the committees, to perform that original review. And it's based on the paragraph of the Book of Discipline that it relates to, or the topic that it relates to, as to which committee it will be. Because each committee has specific topics. Like I'm on the Finance and Administration one, so we will talk about the budget, and we will talk about the new clergy pension plan. And so specific topics go under specific committees to have conversation. So as in the same way that each petition goes to a particular committee, each voting delegate has a particular committee that they are assigned to. We actually get to choose, to some degree, which committee we're on. You can't have We couldn't all be on the same committee from one annual conference, but we were able to choose which committees, the 6 of us who are voting members, because there's only 6 of us who can vote. There's 14 committees, so obviously Wisconsin doesn't have a vote on every one of those legislative committees. But our delegation as a whole had conversation at the time we were deciding which committees we wanted to be on, to say which are the ones that we think are the most important for us to have a voice on. And so we chose our committees based on what information we had at that time for that. So as Jenny said, the first week that we meet mainly in those 14 legislative committees. The committees aren't all of the same size, but they generally are between like 50 and 70 people or so in each of the committees. The committees elect their own leaders who are going to lead them during the time, and then they discuss, can amend and vote on every single petition that comes to the committee. And we aren't done with our work in committee until we have voted on every single one. So there might be some later nights if your committee's not working as quickly and getting through, or you have lots and lots of petitions you have to get through. The advantage of being in smaller groups is it allows for a little more informal conversation and discussion about the subcommittee, or about the petitions, particularly because sometimes there are subcommittees which may only be a dozen or 2 dozen people having conversation about each piece of legislation that's been assigned to that subcommittee. But when we get through some of that initial conversation, then we do have formal votes and formal amendments if we have them to every piece of legislation. So obviously when you have this much stuff, as we talked about, you only have so much time, and so many of the pieces of legislation do go on what's called the consent calendar, as was mentioned, and go on that so that either the entire body can vote it up or down, and some of the things are, nope, we're not going to do anything with this, and some of them are, yeah, this is a great idea. And if the legislative committee it comes to is mostly in favor of it, that's how it gets on the consent calendar in order to speed along the process of approving things. So we get through that first week, and we've gone through most of the legislation in committee, and then the second week becomes meeting as a group of all 800 and some of us together, and then to vote both on the consent calendar items as well as things that are more controversial or were more split or are more major sorts of things like the social principles. We will vote on regionalization. We will. Some of the things that Lisa's going to be talking about are all things that are not just going to get passed at a subcommittee level, put on a consent agenda, and we all pass and don't even realize that we've actually voted for it. So those things always have conversation with the group as a whole. One other thing that I wanted to mention about how we operate at General Conference is the term of the use delegates is intentional. We are not considered to be representatives, meaning we don't come and vote. You don't tell us how to vote, and we just go and vote the way that our annual conference is telling us to vote. We are expected to engage in holy conferencing. Sometimes we're better at that than at other times. Those of you who've been to annual conference have experienced that as well. But the intention is for there to be holy conferencing and holy listening, and that we are to be in conversation with each other and to have open minds and open hearts, to hear what others are saying and to hear what the Holy Spirit is saying to us in our decision making. As you can guess from this description of all of this, General Conference becomes long days, exhausting days, and weeks that we spend there. Over the time that I've been a delegate, I think we've gotten better at recognizing that people who are exhausted from too long of days and too long of weeks do not necessarily make the best decision. So we need to make sure that we have Sabbath, so Sunday we have off, and that we don't work as late into the evenings as what we did in earlier general conferences. So that's been an advantage to what has changed over the years. One of the things that hasn't changed over the years, I will say, is the wonderful worship that happens at General Conference. I think most of us say that is our favorite part of General Conference, that there is just wonderful worship, there is great preaching, there's glorious music, and there's presentations as well. There's a lot of things that make you very proud to be a United Methodist and are very inspiring to the work that we do, that we share. And so I would encourage you, if you can come, as Jenny said, there's lots more people than delegates who come, and it's a wonderful experience to come. Charlotte is not as close as Minneapolis is, unfortunately, but if you can't come, we also now have technology which will live stream it for you. And so we strongly encourage you, if you have time and have an interest, to join in and take a look at the agenda, find out when the worship is. If you don't want to watch all the voting and all that part of it, you can just watch the worship, and I'm sure you will be uplifted and inspired by the worship at General Conference. So very much encourage you to do that. Any questions at this point about any of it? Yep, Don.
I haven't done the math. Don, I'm counting on you to have done the math. How many members are on each committee, or do the committee sizes vary based on how many petitions fall in their realm? Or?
They vary based on, because we each get to choose, some of the committees that there's a lot of interest in and important legislation coming to might have more people on them than some of the other committees. But I think, at least in the past, my experience has been there's been at least like 50 people on every one, and yeah, the higher end ones might have 70 or maybe 80 or something.
Just curious as to what committees did our delegates decide were more important to be on?
Dang, I am like finance and administration, and I can't even tell you. I think we have 2 on church and society, which has 3 different ones. 2 of ours are on 2 of those. Help me out with what else we're on.
Judicial administration, Board of Ordained Ministry. One of our delegates is our chair of our Wisconsin Board of Ordained Ministry, so that was a natural one for her to be on. And like Lisa said, the Church and Society is broken up into 3, Church and Society 1, 2, and 3, and that deals with, I'm on Church and Society 2, which is dealing with a bulk of the human sexuality petitions.
Was that 6?
And that's all I can remember.
Did we have
It's probably one of those books, though.
Maybe conferences? Did
yes.
you put somebody on conferences?
Allie's in conferences. Which one are you on? Judicial Council. So. While Lisa's talking, we'll look it up in the book.
All right.
You mentioned that the voting delegation was 50% clergy and 50% laity. I think, Jenny, you also mentioned that there's United Methodist churches from around the world that are part of it, but then you also, I think if I understood you, that there's like affiliated groups or could you talk to that, and what kind of, do they have voting privileges? And who are they? What would be some examples of affiliated groups?
So I think they call them concordant churches. So they may be from denominations that at one time were part of the United Methodist Church. So they tend to be Methodist churches. I know I can speak to the Methodist Church in Bolivia, for example, and many of the South American churches who were Methodist at one time and became autonomous. And so yes, they have both voice and vote from each of those. They're a relatively small percentage of everyone, but yes.
Kind of as a follow-up to that, so what would be the status of the Global Methodist Church?
I think to be a concordant church, that would need to be approved by General Conference, I would assume, and General Conference has not met since the Global Methodist Church was formed. So I don't know. I haven't read all the new legislation, so I don't know if there's legislation coming to this General Conference to try and establish some of those relationships with the Global Methodist Church that we might have with other denominations. So if it doesn't come now, I suspect, in 2 years or 4 years or whatever, something might come like that. Yeah.
Alan, who's also another delegate.
No, I'm a reserve delegate. Yes, very strange. Well, don't forget the concordance churches include our mother church, which is the Methodist Church of England, and everything associated with this. And I believe the church in Australia, which is not United Methodist, which is not Methodist, but calls them, is a merger between two of the major churches. So some of them are fairly large, not just little ones, but some are very big.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, I don't know who all they are, but yeah, you're right.
All right. You heard me. I'm the one with the big mouth that keeps running on. Okay, so I get to talk about the fun stuff. Regionalization. I mean, I don't know if you, I'm hoping that all of you, or all of us really should keep in tune to what is going on in our denomination, because we know what has happened with this affiliation. And so we're in a transformative mode. And so now that we're in a transformative mode, looking at regionalization, and this is actually even the talk of regionalization, has been talked about for many years, but seeing that, you saw the numbers that Don showed up on the screen earlier, that we are a global church. I mean, as much as we talked about disaffiliation here, we know that we're a global church. So in our book of discipline is very U.S.-centric when we're talking about pensions. That pension system does not impact an African pastor who has a completely different structure system across the ocean, or it doesn't impact someone in Germany. And so then it comes up, so how can we create systems and structures that give us flexibility so that people can do ministry in their own context, thinking that it's not just a set way out of what we have traditionally done here in the United States. And so, in a sense, regionalization has been here. The central conferences have been working in that form for quite some time in the creation of the United Methodist Church. We may not realize it, but it has. They've been able to, to take things and modify the book of discipline to their own ministry context. So it's not just, we think it's only about LGBTQ plus because of what we've talked about in the United States, but it's not. It's also, too, how do you build the structure, the roles, and different things of bishops, and that may be different because the ministry context doesn't look the same every place. So do we want to put a one-size-fits-all and say, hey, we do this in the United States, you do it the same way? That's not gonna work. And so if we want to be a church that is open and inclusive to all culturally, we're gonna have to really rethink about some of those things of how we do things. And so that's where regionalization comes in. And then again, that it would be across the denomination, that would include the United States. So then we would have regional conferences. So we could have regional conferences with or without jurisdictions. So if there are regional conferences, we already know that the United States has jurisdictions, but one without it would elect and assign bishops for those Episcopal areas. Those regional conferences with jurisdictions would set boundaries of what. So it's a kind of a reimagining of things, and it gets us from being so U.S. centric, so that we can do ministry and do it well. So if we're talking about making disciples, let's do it on the context of what the culture needs in that area. And so, and then the people that live there, they know what they need, and they know what they need to do to make disciples. I mean, we know what the theology is, but how you live that out, communicated and everything like that, is going to look differently by cultures. And so I just wanted to say that that's what regionalization. I will say that I would invite all of you to check out if you just would just type in Ask UMC and then put regionalization. They have a whole series on their website where you could really get into this and really find out more information. And it's one of the things that we wanted to do here. We don't want just to send it just an e-blast. We want to make sure that you are informed. You take this back to your congregations and inform your congregations, because we need to have all the levels of communications. And I think that when we do that, and so when things are communicated better, then we work well together and we can do ministry well together. So I wanted to just take just a little bit to talk about regionalization, because it is extremely important. And so that's one of the big things that we're going to be voting on. Another thing that is going on at General Conference, there are many petitions, I haven't counted them, regarding that, and talking about the removal of harmful language in the Book of Discipline regarding our LGBTQ plus siblings. And we know that that the language is harmful. And so there's a movement saying that we need to be able to remove that language. There are some conferences have already done resolutions already to remove very specific things out of the Book of Discipline. Some conferences have already had